track rates very, very overrated.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Strike Rate, the Cricket Analytics Podcast, part 3 of our show on how to prepare for a draft or auction. It's time for your questions. Before we get to that, just a quick thanks to Taneli, Darshan, Razi, Callan, and Joe, who all asked questions that I'd already put down on the list of questions for this show. So we won't get to yours, but we did see them, and we appreciate the interaction. First question, Dan, is from another Dan Good, on Twitter. Do you or any other analysts keep any sort of data on situational characteristics of a player? For example, Ben Stokes, his stats aren't exceptional, but he's a mega clutch player and turns up when the team needs it.
I don't really believe in the word clutch in terms of cricket players for several reasons. Is that to be a professional sports player, already you're going to have to be quite strong mentally compared to the average person. It's almost like a filter out process already. But more importantly, how many times in a player's career are they in like a mega clutch situation? Now, everyone says this about Ben Stokes, which obviously Dan's referred to in his question here, but they don't remember the name Carlos Brathwaite World Cup.
Ben Stokes remembers the name.
I'm sure he probably does. And so they don't refer to that. They don't refer to the fact that his team needed him today in the test match and he got out straight away. You know, like it's almost like a fallacy in people's heads that they remember the times that a player bailed out a team, like Stokes did in Headingley, for example, but they don't remember the times when it was just, you know, a mundane event like today when he got out like everyone else did for barely any runs. And I think that you can throw like a Sam Curran into that, because the commentators in England, they always say Sam Curran makes things happen. But he doesn't, because there's games he goes 0 for 40 and gets out quickly. But they just forget about those. So for me, no, I'm not a massive fan of this.
Yeah, I think on pressure as well. So talking about this from a different sports point of view, and in certain sports, so like baseball, basketball, you can isolate certain moments in the game and know that there would be pressure on the player when they were doing the thing they've got to do. Really classic example of this is free throws in basketball when the score is close and there's under 2 minutes on the clock. So if you're 1 point down and you have 2 free throws, what are the percentage chances of a player making their free throws? And it turns out they're more or less the same as in the first minute of the game when there would be no pressure on that player. What I think, with pressure, I think it's an interesting thing to think about, because it definitely is a thing. Like, all of us will have felt pressure in our jobs or, with our families or playing sport ourselves. Definitely is a thing. And I think we can accurately say that a player did something well under pressure. Ben Stokes played a great innings under pressure at Headingley in 2019. What the data from basketball tells us is that the fact that he did that in the past is not predictive of him being good under pressure in the future. And I think that's the crucial thing that we need to bear in mind with things like pressure. Next question is from Random Cricket Stats. And this is similar to something we asked earlier in the show. So if you want to give a really quick answer, that's fine. But there's a little bit of nuance to it. And I've got maybe an idea. Random Cricket Stats says, are there differences in how you'd approach an IPL auction or a similar structure based on how many years are left before a mega auction?
100%. Because let's say that I was involved with a team in the recent IPL auction, right? I know that there's probably going to be a mega auction in a year's time, because it's the end of the 3-year cycle. So if I know that pretty certainly, I'm doing my best to build a win now team for year one, because there's no point in buying like a load of young players who are prospects on low money, because you won't be able to retain them anyway, because you can only retain 4 players. And you're going to probably retain the guys who are like, your superstars. So the point of buying young players at that point is 1 year left before a mega auction is pretty worthless. However, when you're in a mega auction and you've got to deal with this squad for 3 or more years minimum, that's when you want to look at future proofing things a lot more. And looking at young players or cheaper players who can grow in the environment that you're going to create, and build with the franchise, come with them on the journey. That's when you want to look at younger players and future proofing your franchise. But this is another nuance of the mini versus mega auction dynamic, right? There's so much to consider.
Yeah, I think that covers it. I was going to make exactly the same thing on win, the exact same point on win now. If you know you've got to throw someone back into the pond, as it were, you literally want who'll be best tomorrow. Like, it doesn't matter that they might cost a fortune, and it doesn't matter that they're 33, because you don't have to deal with them when they're 34.
Exactly.
You know, like Suhas on Twitter says, which is the better system? And this is an offbeat question. Which is the better system, draft or auction, for creating a following among people towards a new league?
100% auction.
Okay, what's your reasoning?
All you had to do was see, well, you see it in the IPL every year anyway, but that's, India's a cricket mad country. And so maybe you can't take that in isolation. But all you had to do was see the SA20 auction and how that lit up social media and how the tournament has developed off the back of that very, very quickly, to see that the auction model is just fantastic. It just creates so many talking points.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's just for the great headline, X player sells for $3 million or whatever it is, like that. You're immediately splashing that all over the back page of whichever nation you're in, and so on. Seb says, how do you and other analysts weigh up availability of overseas players against quality? Do you prioritize players who are not regularly picked for their country, and sometimes with drafts, international series pop up after they have been announced?
It's one of the hardest things actually to deal with if you're in a kind of draft environment or in a league that's not the IPL. In the IPL, you can, most of the time you're going to get full availability from every player for the tournament. Not always the case, but a lot of the case. In other tournaments, it's tough because you're right. Seb's right in saying that sometimes you might draft a player and then, like, randomly their country decides to pick them in a series that hadn't been announced by the time you done the draft. There's also other factors to consider which people may not have considered, in that getting an NOC off certain countries who I won't name is much more difficult than others. So actually, the NOC process, on a complete side note, is, I think, one of the biggest talking points that's going to happen in cricket over the next year or two, and it has to change. So I would definitely be wary about signing players from certain countries based on the availability of NOCs, and that affects the player ultimately, right? Because they're not getting picked when they probably merit getting picked on their performances. If I know that an overseas player is fully available, of course that makes them a very useful commodity, but they've still got to be a good player, obviously, and fit into the role that you want them to play. But yeah, you would definitely factor in availability as a major facet for overseas players.
Cool. Toby on LinkedIn asked a question. I think we'll cover this in a bit more detail on the next episode, but he's asked the question. He's given a specific example, so we're gonna get an answer. Obviously, the first round is easy to predict in a draft, but how much of the draft or auction after that do you plan out before? And what happens if someone steals your pick? So answer the second bit there. Say you wanted somebody, you've got fourth pick in a draft. You think it's going to be Ben Stokes, but just humour me here. But Ben Stokes gets picked third. What's the immediate reflex reaction to that from you?
Well, you've got to be pretty calm, I think, after that, because I think it's more of an issue in a draft than it is in an auction, because you've literally got like a minute or two to make a decision very, very quickly, and you can't stall, you can't request a timeout. You might be able to say the technology doesn't work to buy you a little bit more time, but I haven't tried that one. Yeah, in all seriousness, though. Look, this is what you prep for, right? This is you have depth charts, you have decision trees, whether if someone goes, then our attention turns to this player. It should have all been pretty much planned out in advance. So you shouldn't have to panic. I generally pretty calm in these environments. Happens all the time. You have to get used to it.
Cool. 2 more, and then we're going to wrap up this podcast. Salman from LinkedIn again says, how significant a role does data play in auction simulations and strategizing? Is it overlooked in certain cases or not? I'm paraphrasing the last bit there slightly for the interest of time.
Yeah. Look, it depends who you're dealing with. I've worked with coaches who super buy into it, and I've worked with coaches who don't. And so realistically, you've got to pick who you're dealing with, and I think that's a really good learning for people who want to get into analytics. I think we sort of touched on it in one of the earlier episodes. Is that make sure you know who you're working with, because that will have a massive implication on what Salman's asking here in terms of how much of a role does data play. Because if you're in a room, people, and you're the only one that believes in data, good luck with getting all your plans through. That's all I'll say.
Yeah. Final one then, Ben from Substack. When assessing players' current form, how do you factor in longer formats, if at all?
Okay, so to give context in an IPL framework, I did look at stuff like the 50 over domestic comps in India as well. There'll be some form of a weighting that I would give that, and it's especially useful when you've got perhaps a scarcity of T20 data on a young player, for example, but they've played a lot of 50 over games or more 50 over games. Then definitely that's definitely useful. Red Bull less so. I mean, there might be certain transferabilities and skills, but I'd be concerned about putting much weight in Red Bull data in terms of T20 recruitment. You know, there's a reason why Jimmy Anderson doesn't play T20, for example, and the skill set's just completely different.
Cool, Dan. I think that wraps up this episode of Strike Rate, the cricket podcast. Hope you enjoyed it, and join us again. It will be next week now for part 2, or a sister episode to this, where we talk about what actually happens during a draft or an auction, some of the sort of decision trees that you might have to go down. Remember that you can find us on Twitter. I'm at JackHope0, and Dan is at SA Advantage, and that's where we'll tweet out the next topic for the following podcast and where you can ask questions. Dan, any final messages from you?
No, I just want to say thanks to everyone as well for listening and watching. We always welcome your feedback and comments and questions and topic suggestions. So get in touch with us, and make sure you like and subscribe to this as well if you're watching on YouTube.
Absolutely. That actually is the crucial point. The more people that click follow or subscribe on whichever platform you're on, the better, the quicker this grows, the happier we are, the more podcasts we can do. So catch you next week. Cool. Do you need a break, or you're right to just barrel straight on?
Back on if you are.
Yeah. This one should be a bit quicker if we don't have an extra section.
That was good. I like that.